Back to the breaking news on the side of your screen there. 11 pupils having died in a scholar transport crash in Vanderbijlpark. That's in Gauteng. We're told 5 others are currently in a critical condition. Gauteng Education MEC Matome Chiloane has now arrived at the scene where authorities are still investigating the cause of this accident. We'll show you in a short while what we know so far, but these are pictures that we received at the very latest of the crash incident. Really devastating what's happened on this Monday morning as pupils around the country prepare for the very first full week of the academic year, and it's kicked off on a really sobering note, especially for the schools that have been affected by this, and no doubt the families that we understand are also now at the scene trying to ascertain whether or not their children are among those who are sadly declared dead or are currently in hospital fighting for their lives. It's an unimaginable situation for any parent or family, so to speak, and we'll certainly keep a very close eye on the situation as it unfolds on the ground. As we do that, let's continue getting you reaction on this breaking news story. Speak now to Ayanda Allie, who is a member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature and in fact is part of the Education Committee and joins us now. Ayanda, I can't imagine what it's like for any affected family watching and waiting for news around whether or not their children are among those who have died or those in hospital. No matter how you dice it, this is a horrible way to kick off the week.
Way to begin the education calendar, Ayanda. I don't even know if one can say good morning to you or even good day under the circumstances. But as a mother, one can just only imagine receiving that phone call and having to rush to the scene to wonder whether or not you'll be picking up the remains of your child. No parent should ever have to bury their child. So tragedy all the way around there. But I think this is indicative, and one is very wary of trying to politicize this matter. Now is not the time for such. But I think it is indicative of a huge problem that we have in Gauteng. And you'll know that our province is the smallest in terms of land mass, but it's the largest in population. As people come here to seek economic opportunities, it means the schools are burgeoning, they're bursting at the seams, the schools are overcrowded. Parents cannot send their children to a good quality school within a 5-kilometer radius, and therefore you see them having to bus their children across town to different areas in search of what every parent wants: good quality education so that your child can have a future. And if this is the result at the end of the day, it's gut-wrenching and it's absolutely a travesty, and our condolences go to the families. And of course, we wish the little ones who are injured a speedy recovery.
And of course, sadly, in a province like ours, this is an all too familiar sight. I mean, investigators are still at the scene trying to get a sense of what led to the accident, but often we are pointed in the same direction. You know, it's either the vehicle wasn't in good condition, the driver tried to overtake while speeding, or a combination of all those issues. It's going to force us once again to reckon with ways in which pupils in this province are consistently being let down by the system.
Absolutely. Ayanda, you speak on scholar transport and the roadworthiness of those vehicles. Remember that many times, and of course I don't want to make assumptions here, we have not found any investigation that can prove what I'm about to say, but because this is not an isolated incident, one can reflect on past incidents and say that many times the vehicles are crammed. And this is because, as I said, to reduce the costs of transportation, that heavy burden on families as you try to take your child to a good school, the child will firstly wake up at around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, get into this crammed vehicle because it's a cheaper and more affordable alternative, because the school fees themselves are having us in a difficult position as parents. And by the time the child does even get to school, I end up they can barely focus. They've been awake for a couple of hours. And this is the burden that many families have to carry as they try to change their state of affairs in the family to make sure that at least somebody can grow up to be something significant. And this child I'm going to invest in. And if they must wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, that's what needs to happen. And if they must get into this crowded vehicle, that's what needs to happen. But unfortunately, many times the child simply doesn't come back home from school.
Yeah. The difficulty here, of course, is that I imagine regulation might be a bit complex because it is the prerogative of the parent to decide how they'd like their child to be ferried to and from school. And that's why I think there's been an increase in these privately operated scholar transport vehicles and companies. So as a member of the provincial legislature, Ayanda, I wonder what kind of questions you reckon you and your colleagues in the province should be asking about how, at the very least, to start curbing the trend, sadly, that we're seeing insofar as scholar transport is concerned?
Unfortunately, this issue is a symbiotic one. So one feeds off of the other. And unfortunately, you do have a result that is this manner. So it's not just the parents, even though we can speak to the parents, but you look at the schools themselves. Why are children not able to go to schools that are within a walking distance? We're supposed to have a school in about 5-kilometer radius. But if you're living in Matube, you're living in an area where you feel the education is substandard and below par, you are almost put in a corner and forced to take your child to a school that's much further away. I'm not going to speak about the online registration and the disaster that it has been for many parents and the headache that it is, because again, we don't know whether this is applicable in this case. But again, we speak in general terms because there is a general problem when it comes to education in Gauteng. We're not building the schools that we are promised to build. They have given indication of how they're going to build these schools. They don't. Many of the schools are prefab. We still have asbestos schools. So it's not just about the quality of education in the class or lack thereof. It's also about the infrastructure. It's also about the overpopulation in the schools. It's also about the scholar transport that's there. So you then have a cocktail of disaster that ends up in innocent lives being lost.
Yeah, the Human Rights Commission, incidentally, today in the Northwest was releasing the finding of an investigation that they began last year into scholar transport because they had received an endless list of complaints. And their findings are scathing. Essentially, they found that there are persistent and systemic failures indicating deep-rooted problems and have laid the blame squarely on the provincial government. In fact, part of what they mentioned is that, quite frankly, scholar transport and the way it's being run in the Northwest constitutes a violation of human rights. And I wonder, in the wake of what we're seeing now, whether you reckon it's time for these kind of investigations to be introduced in Gauteng as well.
Absolutely. Ayanda, you'll remember that transport and education both are concurrent functions, which means there are responsibilities that each department has at a national level, at province, and also local government. Now, when it comes to scholar transport, the jury is out on who's responsible for it. So there are some provinces that will then say scholar transport is a competency of the Department of Transport nationally, and they will speak to the province. And in schools, it will be transport department that then accounts. And then there are other provinces that say, no, this is a competency of the Department of Education. So the Department of Education will then assist when it comes to regulating scholar transport. And you have that mismatch that then leaves a gap wide open for unscrupulous taxi owners or maybe even private vehicle owners who then say, I'm going to find a gap in the market and I will ferry as many children as possible, sometimes even double the legal amount that is permitted in that vehicle. And they do so. And what we also then see is that even the government-owned, or shall we say contracted scholar transport, because there are some areas where children have to travel more than 5 kilometers to get to school. And in that instant, government is supposed to then provide scholar transport. You should see the condition of the buses. They're falling apart. You can, while you're sitting in that bus, look below there and just under your feet, you see the top because there's a gaping hole that's right there. So children are subjected to inferior transport, not only because of the condition at home with the parents, but also when government steps in and says it's our responsibility to ferry our scholars in areas, for example, like Bronkhorstspruit, where it's semi-rural. You then find that even those buses are below par. And again, then the blame game comes in. Is it Department of Transport? Is it Department of Education? It's not one standard that's unilateral or that is across the board throughout South Africa. There is a real intervention that's needed here, and I do think such investigations would benefit the province.
Absolutely. As you speak, Ayanda, we're showing our viewers live pictures from the site of the crash itself, and really inconsolable some families look as they try to ascertain, of course, as we mentioned earlier, the extent to which they have been affected by this. We do know that 5 pupils are currently in a critical condition in hospital. 11 have sadly passed away. And ultimately it comes down to what you say to these mothers, fathers, aunts, guardians who are waiting with bated breath, having done everything by the book, and have still been dealt this card because of these failures that have existed and have been pointed out in the past?
Yeah, I think parents really are being given a raw deal when it comes to education. And I think that's very important to also look back at those systemic issues that you speak about. You know, Ayanda, the province of Gauteng has been instrumental in turning around things like e-tolls because they were of the view that the e-tolls and the highway free, the GFIP was not something that was desirable to many of the residents. And they took it upon themselves, incurred massive debts, by the way, to scrap e-tolls. And yet you have a system here that many parents say is not working for them. It is simply leaving their children high and dry, stranded, unable to find the proper schools close to home, unable to find schools close to the parents' work. And yet we have a government that is dull in terms of hearing. They refuse, even after a couple of years of trying this online system and seeing the gremlins and the teething problems, they have not done the proper monitoring and evaluation after the implementation to assess whether or not this is working. It was a noble idea. It was something that we can commend because it was using technology. And I think, the Premier was a pioneer in trying to bring this turnaround in the province, and we applaud him for that. But when you see that a system is not working and it is jeopardizing the well-being of the people you plan or you hope to help, you then need to reevaluate and reassess. Now, Premier is no longer the MEC for education, but I think it's high time that he does what he did with the e-tolls and decides to scrap the system for the well-being of not only the children, but the parents and the caregivers at large. I don't want to use this tragic incident to highlight these issues, but I must stress this because we don't want children being ferried in vehicles and travel long distances in the wee hours of the morning and late afternoons where they are exposed to such vulnerabilities. That is something we cannot subscribe to as a people, and we need to look at all scenarios and use this as an opportunity to reflect and an opportunity to correct.
Absolutely. And let me thank you for your time. Appreciate your reflections as we make sense of this incredibly sobering start to the 2026 academic year, not only for these pupils, of course, who've been affected, but their families and the province at large. Ayanda Allie is a member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature and sits on the Education Committee. For now, thanks very much indeed.